All right. Good morning. How is everybody this morning? Good. Turn to Nehemiah 13, verse 10. I promise you we're going to get through Nehemiah today. Now that I've promised that, we probably won't. Maybe we will. I hope so. I try to make studies long enough that they're thorough, but short enough that they don't drag. So hopefully I succeed in that. Back several years ago, I told a group I was going to go through the book of Revelation. We had studied many of the books of the New Testament and that class, and some of the old, and I said, well, we're going to go through Revelation, but we're going to do it fairly fast. And this one lady said, as we ended the study, she said, I didn't know you could get through it that fast. Oh, man. Anyway, Nehemiah 13, great book. We'll talk about it if we have time. But it's a story of coming back home, if you will. Jerusalem has been rebuilt. There have been 2 other returns. Now there is the third. And Nehemiah has helped in rebuilding the walls, thus fortifying the city, which was very, very important for that day and age. And now, at the end of the book, the last, say, third, Nehemiah spends time talking about how that he has to make certain reformations. There's a repopulation, there's a reformation, and in the 13th chapter especially, what we find are problems. There were some problems, some things that were going on that weren't right, and so he being Nehemiah, is going to lead in the reformation of some of those things. We saw a problem in verses 4 through 6. We saw that problem with regards to the priest, and then the solution in verses 7 through 9, and we ended there last week. So we'll pick up in Nehemiah 13, verse 10. Nehemiah says, I also realized that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had gone back to his field. So I contended with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then all Judah brought the tithe, grain, and new wine, oil to the storehouse. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah, the priest of Zadok, the scribe and of Levites, Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan, the son of Zakur, the son of Mathaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute to their brethren. There's a problem. The problem is that the priests have gone outside of the city. They've gone outside to tend to their, if you will, their gardens. And so what's happened is, as Nehemiah says, the house of the Lord has become forsaken. Now think about this. Think about a city that is considered a holy city with all that has gone on, even through all the years, and yet, now, when all of a sudden everything is coming back in place, it's not right religiously. And so Nehemiah says, I saw what was going on. The Lord's house had been forsaken. Folks weren't worshiping. But not only were they not worshiping, but evidently they weren't bringing their gifts to be sacrificed, their gifts to be used. And so consequently, what did Nehemiah do? It's going to stop, right? And so he brought the priest back. He brought the priest back, and he set up, and the people began to come back, and the people began to be restored back to doing what they were supposed to do. The priest, if you will, is sort of like, we talk about elders elding and deacons deaconing and preachers preaching, and we usually say that, and usually I don't tell the song leaders what to do, and the song leaders, I ask them not to tell me what to do, and it's usually my agreement with them through the years. I haven't made that agreement with Steve or Jim or anybody else that leads here, but haven't had to, and thankful for that. But nevertheless, the folks here, they'd left and forgotten what they were all about. You know, all of a sudden, something else became important. It's almost, if you will, as we might say, what they would consider the immediate overrode the important. The immediate was we got to eat, we got to feed ourselves, our families, and everybody else. And so we've got our gardens out here, and we're going to take care of that. And that was the immediate. And what was important was worshiping God. And so they allowed the immediate to overcome the important. Do you recall a particular story in the New Testament where that happened? How about the story of Mary and Martha in Luke 10? Remember, Martha is sitting there, Mary is up, and Martha says, tell my sister to help me. And Mary's been sitting there at the feet of Jesus, and Jesus says, you're cumbered about. You're drugged down, if you will, with much serving. In other words, here, you need to understand it's not the serving or the hospitality of the people, it's listening to Jesus. And Jesus reminds them of that. We need to be sure that we don't allow the immediate to overtake the important. I do want you to notice verse 13, though. Nehemiah appointed certain reliable people over certain tasks. That's something to be thought about for just a minute. Years ago, when I was listening to a preacher, he talked about, and then he told me on the side, he talked about a time in which a mother came to him and asked that her son be used to lead prayer or wait on the table or something every Sunday. And the reason this mother asked that, she said, if he is appointed to come, he will come. But if he doesn't have a task, he will not be there. Well, I don't remember the result of what was done or what the man told me was done or whatever. But we need to think about, who do we use? And why do we use them? We use those that are considered faithful, those that can, of course, those that have that ability, but folks that are faithful. We place folks in different tasks, whatever the task may be, but we do it with regards to faithful folks. If you can't count on somebody, imagine, if you will, you're going to do something at your house, and you call a contractor, and he says, well, I'll be there Monday, and then Monday shows up and he's not there, and then Tuesday shows up and he's not there, and Wednesday and he's not there. Eventually you're going to do what? You're going to find somebody else, right? You're going to fire him. You're going to find somebody else. You're going to fire him. Why? Because you can't count on him. Church is the same way. In order to move forward, we have to be folks that are dependable, can be counted on. You can count on me. You can turn me loose. Now, I may not accomplish something like the elders want me to accomplish, but at the same time, too, I have to be accountable, and I have to be dependable, and I have to be faithful. And so Nehemiah appoints those who are faithful to the task. Anything else? Well, verse 14 is kind of interesting. Some call it a short prayer. That's an interesting thought. It might very well be. Remember me, O my God, concerning this. As a matter of fact, this is not the first one, or this is not the only one in this chapter. But here's what he says. Remember me, O my God, concerning this. Do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for its service. Keep in mind, remember me, O my God. Now he's going to, right at the end, he's going to say, remember me for my good works. But remember me, keep in mind, behave in such a certain way as to cause this to be in your memory. That's literally, if you look at the Hebrew word, that's literally what it means. Keep this in your thoughts. Now, what does he ask? Do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for the service. In other words, keep in mind what I've done. Keep in mind how that I've tried to restore these folks to worship, restore these folks to service, restore these folks to participate. Now that there comes a problem. Verse 15. What's the problem? Well, let's look. Verse 15 and 16. In those days, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. What's the problem? They're working on the Sabbath. What's wrong with that? That's right. And they were very strict with regards to the Sabbath, right? I mean, you literally you couldn't travel very far from your home. There was basically nothing you could do on the Sabbath. Really, I mean, when you got down to it, and you look in the book of Leviticus and see all of the regulations with regards to the Sabbath, you couldn't travel very far. You couldn't work on the Sabbath, and so you kept the Sabbath. But what was the purpose of keeping the Sabbath? To remember God, right? Spend time with God. Now, the Sabbath is Saturday, the seventh day, so we do not have that regulation. We do have a regulation, though, with regards to the New Testament, and it's to do what? Not forsake the assembly, to assemble upon the first day of the week. Now, there's an interesting thought, not to forsake the assembly, to assemble upon the first day of the week. Where our, if you will, regulation differs from that of the Old Testament, the Sabbath, we can do things, right? We can do things on the Sabbath, or Sunday, excuse me. We can do things on Sunday. We can go play a ball game this afternoon if we want to. We can go shopping if we want to. We can mow the yard if we want to. I know of a preacher that he used to mow his yard on Sunday afternoon. And the elders told me his Sunday night sermons were a whole lot better than his Sunday morning sermons. They kind of encouraged him to mow the yard on Saturday and Sunday. But nevertheless, we can do those things as long as we're where we're supposed to be when saints assemble. Sure. I remember as a kid, we'd go to my mamas and papas, and we would, the ones of us that were there on Sundays, we would play cork ball is what we called it. And because she had a small yard, and so with a cane, just what a lot of folks use as a float, a little bitty cork wound up with black electric tape, and you hit it out in the streets, home run count. And Uncle Eddie Joe, he wore himself out trying to keep up with us boys, and so we did that every Sunday and afternoon, and then of course we were at church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and any other time the doors open, my parents made sure we were there. But the problem was, for Nehemiah's day, they had made the Sabbath a day of work. Notice the solution. It's an interesting solution. It begins in verse 17. Then I contended with the nobles. The word contended sometimes to us means contentious. But there doesn't necessarily have to be, in order to have contention, you don't have to be contentious. In other words, It's just the idea of sometimes we might disagree, and that's fine. That's fine. But the word here means to admonish, and it carries the idea of teaching, but also rebuking. Then I contended, I taught the nobles of Judah and said, what evil thing is this that you do by which you profane the Sabbath day? In other words, here's the interpretation of what they've done. They've profaned. The word profane is the idea of you've made common. You've made common the Sabbath day. Did not your fathers do thus? And did not our God bring all this disaster on us, on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. He said, look, don't you remember that really Jerusalem was destroyed? Why? Because it wasn't keeping the commandments of God. Isn't it interesting here? He says, did not your fathers do thus? Doesn't get into it. Why did he not get into it? Probably didn't have to. They knew what their fathers had done. Why? History, it was passed down from generation to generation to generation. They did not have TVs. So what did they do at night? They sat around and they talked. And they told about families and family history and things of the past. And they talked about that. That was the news, if you will. That was what you did and what you found yourself doing at night a lot of times and at other times as well. They knew, so they didn't have to get in. Nehemiah didn't have to get into a long dissertation. Now, could he have told them, and might he have told them? Yes. But he did not record it for us by inspiration to have. We know it because we go back and we can read, say, 1st, 2nd Chronicles or 1st, 2nd Kings and find out what they did. But what happened was, because of what they sowed, they reaped the disaster, if you will. Disaster on us and on this city. And he says, you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. You've commercialized the Sabbath. You've commercialized it. And we don't want any of that. And so now here, he explains it. So here he further gives the solution. Look at what he says. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and the sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. These folks were so used to it that they still, in making the decision that he made and deciding what he basically decided to do was close Jerusalem. We're going to close the businesses. That's how we're going to handle this. We're going to close Jerusalem. We're going to close the gates. Nobody can come in. Nobody can come out. And that's where all of the trade was coming from. Folks were coming from the outside in. And so basically Nehemiah closed down Jerusalem. And as he closed down Jerusalem, there were those that were still outside the gate. And notice what it took them a couple of times, didn't it? Because he said they lodged outside Jerusalem, outside, of course, the gate, once or twice. Then they caught on. I'm sure word spread. Nehemiah has shut down. Nehemiah has shut down the city. And then continue on, because we're not through yet with the solution. Then I warned them and said to them, why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so again, I'll lay hands on you. See, he not only, if you will, word got around, but he threatened them. From that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath, and I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and they should go and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. They said, look, he said, no more. You don't need to come. If you do, I'm going to run you off. Reminds us of what in the New Testament? Jesus doing what? Yeah. When he cleansed the temple. That's right. Made cords and ran folks out. Not once, but twice. Cleansed the temple. The commercialization of religion is as big today as it ever was, right? You see guys that are televangelists, and there's nothing wrong with being televangelists from the standpoint of trying to spread the word of God through TV. I've been on TV a lot through the years. Matter of fact, we had a weekly program in Dixon, and so I've been on TV a lot. I didn't get famous like a lot of them do, and I sure didn't get rich because I didn't have anybody send in any money. But some of these folks have basically self-promoted and gotten rich purposefully off of their commercialization. Some are honest and sincere, and they've gotten, I don't believe what they're teaching, but they've gotten folks to back them up. And some really are doing it just for the money. And that's sad. So it's not just to Nehemiah's day, but it's something that's a problem, yeah, even today. But Nehemiah basically said, we're going to shut down all of this. Jesus, his day, cleansed the temple. And so there's a solution to the problem. And the problem is we got to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And so we're going to solve that by whatever means. Anything else? Well, there's that word again, remember. Once again, this is probably the second in this chapter of those short little prayers, just sentence prayers, which, by the way, might just make mention of the fact, I've had folks through the years, not here, but I've had folks through the years ask me, well, can you say a sentence prayer? Yes. When I'm driving and that guy passes me doing 90, I'm praying for him. One sentence prayer. Lord, make sure I don't meet him again. Because he's going to flat run over me. I don't want that. But no, usually I pray for his safety, that he'll arrive wherever he's going safely. We do that not just with driving, but I'm sure you do it all the time. Sentence prayer. Is there anything wrong with it? No. It's you're asking God to take care of something or do something, or maybe that's all the time you've got at that point in time. And God knows and God understands. When you think about prayer, there's no set formula for an acceptable prayer. You might say, well, we've got to have, a beginning and an end, and it's got to have all of these things. Well, find that. Do I try to in my prayers? Absolutely. But at the same point in time, too, we have to be mindful that sometimes sentence prayer can do the job. Anything else before we get into the next problem that Nehemiah faces? Okay. Yeah, this is a good one. This is, we've kind of already talked about this because Nehemiah mentioned it earlier. We'll mention it again, though it's a problem. In those days, I saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Now, these, especially Ashdod, this was Philistines or Persian folks. These were not Israelites. So in other words, here's the problem. Kind of in a nutshell, you had the intermarriage of folks, Israelites with those from other nations. Half of their children spoke in the language of Ashdod and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one or the other people. What's the problem? Yeah, Genesis 6, Tower of Babel, or 10, excuse me, not 6, 10, Tower of Babel. That'd be a good way of looking at it. You had a mixture here, and so what happens is the children of Israel are losing their identity when you stop and think about it. And that's part of the reason God had told the children of Israel that he wanted them just to marry Israelites. He wanted to keep that line to Jesus, if you will, pure. But he understood that the intermarriage from the standpoint of Israelites with folks from, say, Ammon or Ashdod or wherever, that they were going to cloud, they were going to wreck, is maybe one way of putting it, but they were basically going to cause the children of Israel to lose their identity. Now, we understand that idea. Imagine, if you will, taking a glass of water and putting some food coloring in it. I'll just pick a color. You put purple in it. You basically have purple water, right? Now, you take that cup and you pour half of that cup into a second glass that is part water, is half water. And you pour half of the first glass into the second glass. And then you take the second glass, you mix it up, and you pour half of that glass into a third glass that is half full of clear water. You know where I'm headed. You go from purple to light purple. Yeah, that's probably the best way of putting it. Yeah, that's probably it. Lilac. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so informal. But you're probably right. Yes. So, but you see where I'm headed, and you understand where I'm headed. Well, that was a concern with with God and Nehemiah's day. God did not want that for his people. And so, while they had done it, it wasn't what they wanted, or what God wanted. And so, here's the problem. Let's. Yeah. Well, if you go all the way back and think about what you had when, this is 446, 436, somewhere in that neighborhood. When Babylon came in 606 BC and they took away everybody, that's pretty much when that activity started. That's a poor word, I'm sorry. But so you're right. Ezra had this problem as well. Sure did. Good point. Anything else? All right, well, let's see the solution. So I contended, there's that word again. I contended with them and cursed them. The idea of curse them is not that he used profanity on them. The word curse here has the idea of pronouncing a curse. It's the idea of you've broken an oath, and I'm putting really an oath upon you. He struck some of them and pulled out their hair and made them swear by God, saying, I don't know of a preacher today that in his right mind would do this. I'm not going to do it. I just feel like I'm not going to do it. It's not a fair fight. If I pull your hair, it's not a fair fight because I ain't got enough to pull. But he said, he pulled their hair and he made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations there were no kings like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women caused even him to sin. Now remember 1 Kings, the 11th chapter, where it talks about Solomon and his wives. Remember, he had wives and concubines, and you remember I told you back not long ago, the little boy that said that Solomon had wives and cucumber vines, and not the same thing. He didn't have those, but he had wives and concubines. And you go down to, it's been a while since I looked at it, honestly, it's been a day or two. 1 Kings 11, verse about 4 or 6, somewhere in that neighborhood, and it says that his wives turned away his heart. And so, he says here, He says, you remember that. These pagan women caused him even to sin. Should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgressing against our God by marrying pagan women? And one of the sons of Joiada, the sons of Elisha, the high priest, was the son-in-law of Sanballat the Hornite. Therefore, I drove him from me. So even the enemies, we talked about Tobias last week. He came up. And now here's Sanballat, who was earlier in Nehemiah, one of the critics, one of the harsh critics of Nehemiah and rebuilding the wall. And so Nehemiah drives them out. But Nehemiah basically, he places the curse upon them and he says, this is not going to happen. We're not going to have this intermarrying of folks from other nations. We're going to keep this line the way it should be. And so I believe that's what they did. Anything along the solution that you'd like to talk about?
Don't do this. Now Solomon did this. It was okay for Solomon to do this because he was such a great king and beloved by God. That just seems sort of do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, but he did say that the result was that they pulled Solomon away. But yes, yeah. Yeah, no, he did not condemn Solomon. That's an excellent point to make about that. Now, it does seem kind of, it's you got to be careful of the analogies that you use because they can backfire on you. Very true. Anything else? Yeah. That's right. And he was. Started out real good, ended up pretty bad. Or at least in religious stuff. Yeah, that could be a way of looking at that. Yeah. I was taught early on in my preaching you have to be careful of analogies because there's seemingly back doors to everything, and there are. But sometimes you're headed in one direction, and folks, you don't think about the back door, and then folks bring it up to you. Suzanne and I were talking this week about one that happened to me 15 years ago in a Bible class. Somebody asked a question. We were talking about something. Somebody asked a very innocent question, and I gave what I thought was a very positive reflection upon certain folks, and did without thinking about somebody that was in my class. And let me tell you, that night they took me in my office and they read the riot act to me. And it's not to say that I was wrong, and it's not to say that I did anything bad. They basically wanted somebody to listen, so I listened. And like I say, I didn't answer incorrectly, and they didn't say that I answered incorrectly. They just didn't like a thing or two and stuff. But I didn't stop to think about the repercussions of part of my answer on their feelings. And so we have to stop and think about analogies. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Anything else? Yeah. I don't know. The only thing I've ever asked them, and they don't like the question, is if you're going to keep the Sabbath of the old law, why aren't you keeping the priesthood and the sacrifices of the old law as well? And it kind of ends the conversation, but I don't understand. I'm with you. And yeah. So. They are. Absolutely. Yeah, good people and devoted to their belief, and And it just, to me, it doesn't make sense. You can bank that basically upon one person for them, and yet they hold to it. And so I'm with you. I have not been successful in talking to them. I'll put it like that. Because I eventually asked them why they don't keep sacrifices, and they don't have an answer for that, to be just brutally honest. And it's not that I'm trying to trick them. I'm trying to understand. If you ever come talk to me, by the way, if you ever come talk to me and I ask you a question, I'm trying to understand. I'm not trying to belittle or trick you. I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from, because I may not see it, or I may not understand your take on it. And so just know that in the future, please come talk to me. I'm glad to talk to you anytime. And I'm not trying to be smart aleck or cut you off. I just trying to help understand. And so, yeah, I don't understand them, but they do. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Matter of fact, there's a Bulletin article I'm gonna write here in the next couple of weeks on why Sunday is special. And so I agree with you. Anything else? Remember them, oh my God. So verse 29 is another, if you will, of the sentence prayers. Oh my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Now think about that for a minute. That kind of gets back to kind of what Jim was saying with regards to the analogy of Solomon. If this is a prayer, and I'm not saying that it is or isn't, but if it is a prayer, he's asked God to remember that they've defiled the priesthood, to remember the wrong that they've done, to keep in mind the wrong that they've done. And that just seems antithetical to the way we think. That forgiveness, and part of forgiveness is, God, remember what they've done, but don't really remember it. Forget it. Forgive them. And so you say, well, why did he say it that way? I don't honestly know, and I don't know that any of us would know, because he doesn't tell us. And none of us, it's always surprising to me. Since digging that hole, let me dig it a little deeper. None of us know what are in the hearts and minds of individuals. You just don't. Let me give you a short story right quick. I had a man one time tell me, as we were talking, he says, I know what you're thinking. Okay, what am I thinking? Now, how do you combat this? When you get down to it, how do you combat? I said, okay, what am I thinking? He said, you're thinking, and he told me what he believed I was thinking. And I said, no, that wasn't what I was thinking. That's really far away from what I was thinking. He said, nope, I'm right. And it's like, and he really wasn't. I mean, I wasn't feeding him a line, telling him that, because that really was not what I told him, honestly, truthfully, what I was thinking. He told me I was wrong, or basically that I had lied to him. And I had not. You can't know what's going on. We think we know. We assume a lot of times what folks know and what they're thinking. That's why I ask questions. That's what I say. I don't ask questions to be rude or anything. I ask questions to understand, to pull out what you're thinking so that I can understand. I think Jesus did that. Well, I don't know what he was thinking, and I have no way of knowing. But look at verse 30. Verse 30 and 31 in many ways are a great concluding summary. Thus I cleansed them of everything pagan. So having said that, he's now really, if you will, asking God to forgive them. I've cleansed them. I've cleansed them of everything pagan. I also assigned duties to the priests and to the Levites, each to his service, and to bringing the wood offering and the first fruits at appointed times. I assigned duties to the priests and the Levites, each to his service. I gave appointments. You see, I think busy people are happy people. I always have thought that. I think, you find a service that you can do, you roll your sleeves up, you become involved in it, and you don't have time to think about everything else. Why? Because busy people are happy people. I've preached that for years. Ask Suzanne. Suzanne, y'all feel sorry for Suzanne, I know, because she's married to me. I understand that. But Suzanne, I think she even told the search committee, y'all get to change preachers. I've had mine for 37 years and don't get to change. So feel sorry for me. So, y'all feel sorry for her. But nevertheless, he says, I gave them duties. Why? Because busy people are happy people. And to bring the wood offering and the first fruits at the appointed times. Even bring the wood. Get ready. Get going. We're going to do it. And so, once again, if these are sentence prayers, here's the last one. Remember me, oh my God, for good. That's a great thought. There was the Free Hardeman Associates back in the 70s, I believe, put out 2 books for ladies' classes entitled Remember Me for Good, coming from this. And they talked about different things with regards to that. But I think that's a tremendous statement. God, remember me for good. Remember me for the good that I've done, for the good that I've tried to do. And there's an implication behind that. What's the implication? I got to do good, right? If I ask God to remember me for good, I've got to do good. Anything else? Yeah. I tend to lean in that direction, yes. Very true. Very true. Anything else? Well, let's go through. We've tried to list some lessons learned through all of this. How about in this chapter? What are some lessons that we might learn? Well, how about eternal vigilance is necessary to prevent apostasy? In other words, we got to stay on guard. We got to keep watch. What's going on? What's happening? What's taking place? And they had to do that in order to prevent apostasy, in order to prevent from turning away from God. Another lesson that you might learn is when you sin, reformation is necessary and is possible. You can change your life. You can change the direction of your life. You can change what you're doing. You can change your purpose. And if it's not in conformance to God's will, you need to change it. Next, love God's will more than any other. We already hit on that, but that's a good lesson to learn. How about this? Good ideas don't justify breaking of the law. Good ideas do not justify the breaking of the law. You see, they thought these problems, well, these are good ideas. After all, what are we doing on the Sabbath? Why not? Why not do a little shopping on Sabbath? That's not what God wanted them to do. And so, even though it was maybe a good idea, it didn't justify breaking the law. Purity is important. And then I think a good lesson to learn is, Lord, remember me. Remember me for what I've done. Any questions or comments, suggestions? Anybody have a suggestion on what you want to study next? Well, here's my proposal then, if nobody's going to suggest. Let's go back to the book of beginnings and study the book of Genesis. We'll just start at the beginning. I promise you we're not going to take it like we've taken Nehemiah. We're going to, we'll take a little time with Genesis 1, but we will group stories and we'll kind of just look at the stories. And I'm not saying I'll get through in 13 weeks either, but I'll try to make it as helpful and studious and informative as possible without dragging. How about that? Okay? So that's where we'll go then. I haven't started, by the way, studying for that. So if somebody has another suggestion, I'll be glad to entertain it. All right, anything else? Let's bow for a word of prayer right quick. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day and for the blessing of it. Thankful for everything that you've given to us and all that you have done for us. We're thankful that you love us and watch over us, and we're mindful of those that will be in the announcements in just a few minutes. We're mindful of them. We ask that you be with them, bless them. Help us to be folks that are about them and making sure that they are well and that they have everything they need. Help us to be better servants in your kingdom. Help us to be more like servants in your kingdom. Watch over us, bless us, and keep us. Forgive us of our sins. For this I pray in Christ's name, amen. Y'all have a great week. Thank y'all.